Good afternoon and welcome everyone. We're just going to take a couple of minutes to make sure that everyone who's joining today can finish logging onto this call. I think we're ready to go. Welcome to this East West Railway Company online public event for Clapham Green to the Eversdens. My name is Claire Keith Anderson and I'm the Community Engagement Manager for East West Railway Company. Following the launch of the second round of non-statutory consultation on the 31st of March, this week we're holding the second round of online events or webinars. The focus of today's session is on responding to the questions raised by communities to date. For those wanting more detailed dialogue with specialists from the project team, please attend any of our live chat events. We will start with a quick run through of what we're consulting on in your area, but the focus of today's event is on responding to questions raised to date by yourselves. We are holding similar sessions across the whole route between Oxford and Cambridge throughout this week. I'd now like to take this opportunity to introduce to you the rest of the team. Joining us today, we also have Ian Parker, our Programme Delivery Director, our Programme Manager for Connection Stage 2, Paul Sparrow, our Head of Operations, Maria Cliff, our Head of Customer Strategy, Martin Phillips, our Land and Property Manager, Jorn Pace, Steve Yates, a Senior Advisor from our Land and Property Consultant, Harriet Parker, Deputy Environmental Lead for Arup, our Environmental Consultant, and also Nick Mitchard, Environmental Lead for Arup, our Environmental Consultant. And not to forget James and Karis, who are working in the behind the scenes. Before we start with the presentation, I'm going to run through a brief housekeeping and Teams Live note. Many of you might be familiar with Teams Live, but just a reminder, you'll be on mute throughout. Please note that these sessions are being recorded and therefore will not reference any names or descriptions directly, even if provided in any of the questions for GDPR reasons. That's all the housekeeping we have. Over to you, Ian.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Claire. Just very quickly then, before we get into the detail of this presentation, which as Claire said is all about the questions you've asked and our responses to those. I'd just like to introduce myself and a little bit of information about the agenda for this afternoon. So my name, as I say, is Ian Parker. I'm the Programme Delivery Director for East West Rail. Effectively, my role is to ensure that the scheme is designed and then constructed in the best and most efficient way. In terms of the agenda for this afternoon, we have, as I say, most of the time focused on answering questions that you've previously asked, but first we'll start with a recap of what we're consulting on, and then we'll get into questions. We've broken the questions down into different areas, hopefully in grouping them in a way that makes most sort of logical sense. And then finally, once we've been through the questions, in the last few minutes, we'll tell you a little bit more about further ways in which you can get involved in this consultation and indeed then what happens next. So just to remind you, on the next slide, what you'll see is the East-West Rail route. It is a proposed new rail link between the centres of Oxford and Cambridge, going through, of course, Bletchley, Bedford and Camborne on that route. It's been divided into three, what we've referred to as connection stages. And connection stage 1 we're already constructing. That's the section between Bicester and Bletchley. You'll know that that's already in its construction phase. And then the two further connection stages are extending the railway from Bletchley on to Bedford, and then again from Bedford on to Cambridge, so that when we get to our third connection stage, the route between the two cities is complete. And I'm going to hand you over to Maria, who's going to just talk to you a little bit about what we're consulting on in this current consultation exercise. So Maria.
Thanks, Ian. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Maria Cliff. I'm Head of Operations for East West Railway Company. And just very briefly, we've split the consultation itself into two main sections. So the first section is on our approach and plans for customer experience in railway operations. And then the second section is predominantly on the infrastructure development, again, split into 6 different sections. So if I quickly give you an overview of the customer experience in railway operations part of the documentation, we're really keen to understand your views and what you want to use this railway for on an end-to-end journey basis. So right from when you plan your journey on the railway through to post-journey, and the types of services we're going to offer in terms of calling patterns and regular clock-face departures, so that we have a regular, reliable and frequent service for you, our future customers. We've asked some specific questions in the consultation document in relation to your experience on our stations, on our trains, when you want to interact with colleagues and how you want that interaction to be, and right the way across your journey, the types of customer information you need and want at different parts of the journey. So please take the time to respond to the questions, and my team and I want to hear views so that we can start to design and deliver a railway that is fit for future customers across the board. The second part of the consultation, as I mentioned, is the infrastructure, and that is split into 6 different sections. But today we are predominantly focused, as you know, on section D in the yellow box there. So thank you very much, and I will hand over back to Ian. Thanks, Ian.
Thanks, Maria. So today we're focused on the section, what we refer to as section D, which is the section between Clapham Green and the Eversdens. And in the next slide, what you see are the routes route alignments that we've been looking at in the last 12 months or so. So all of these routes run obviously between those two locations. What we look to do as we've developed route options is to identify routes that potentially can call at stations either in the St Neots or Tempsford area, and then in Camborne, either to the north or the south of Camborne. And we started off with a large number of route alignments, and we've narrowed that down to 5. The 5, in our view, are the best combinations that connect stations somewhere in the Tempsford and St Neots area with the Camborne area. And we've also then gone a little bit further, and we've identified our 2, what we refer to as emerging preferences. So we're still consulting on all 5, but 2 of those we would see as our better options, not yet a chosen option. And obviously, as I say, we're looking at all 5. But the 2 that we've identified both run in parallel to the A428, the new A428 that Highways England is proposing. So following that existing transport corridor, one via Tempsford, which would cross under the A428 and then carry on to the north of the A428 along its new corridor. The other crossing the A1 at Black Cat roundabout, and then swinging north again to follow the A428 corridor. So those are the 5 alignments and the 2 emerging preferences that we have. What we're going to do with the rest of this presentation now is to go through questions rather than talk at you with more facts and figures. So I'm going to hand you over first to look at some environmental questions, so I'm going to hand you over to one of our environmental specialists, Nick, who's going to take you through some of those. So Nick, can you talk us through the questions raised on the environment, please?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. So, hi everybody, my name is Nick Mitchard. I work for Arup. Arup are supporting East West Rail Company, and I'm the environment lead for the project. So some of the questions with regards to environment, but first of all, what I wanted to do was just kind of share with you that East West Rail are committed to minimising impacts on the environment. Where possible through the design, indeed enhancing the existing environment. Some of the next two slides I want to take you through just sets out some of the key environmental principles as to how this is being done, some of the things which are influencing our thinking through the design process, and indeed some of the things which we will seek to be measured by as we go forward through construction and operation. To taking these in turn, the project is absolutely seeking to strive for net zero carbon in line with broader principles, best practice, emerging net zero carbon policy and legislation. And this will be through the way that the scheme is procured, the way it's constructed, and indeed through the operation of the railway. We are committed to biodiversity net gain. And broadly what this means is, as opposed to just trying to replace what is lost, the value of what is lost is considered and it is replaced like for like. Often that will mean replacing more as a quantity of habitat than is actually lost. And we'll do this by firstly through the design phase, avoiding high value and priority habitats. But then as we move forward into the design, it's about how we enhance existing habitats through management practices and also the creation of new habitats. In referred earlier to some of the work that's been done around the route alignments, and what this is very much an environment-led project. This is about thinking about how we can avoid, most importantly, directly impacting on the most important environmental and heritage sites, such as listed buildings and triple SIs, but also how we generally avoid habitats and where and other features, and where those features can't be avoided, how we then seek to minimise those impacts, or how indeed we then seek to mitigate them. We are developing our resilience and mitigating flood risk by being minded of climate change policies, both from a national and a local perspective, and ensuring that that resilience is built into the design of the project, so we can build a scheme that provides resilience long into perpetuity, and also ensuring that those factors are taken into account when we do our flood risk assessment. So we're not just looking at today's standards, we're looking at future standards. We are investigating sustainable energy for our trains, and although no commitment has yet been made by the government to electrify the railway, we will need to ensure that it aligns with relevant policy and complies with relevant legislation relating to net zero carbon effects. So that's very much about in our thinking at the moment. Starting last year and continuing through this year and indeed through next year, we have an extensive program of environmental surveys for protected species and for other environmental features, including heritage. We're really mindful of the value of protected species, such as the colony of Barbasdale bats in Wimpole and Eversdens woods. And as I said, we are building a really good understanding through the surveys that we're doing of not only the locations of those species, but also the behaviours of those species and how we need to consider them through the design process. We're mindful of the extent of agricultural land and the rural nature of this section of the route, and managing impacts on farms and land holdings is really key to a lot of the work we're doing around design. We are seeking to avoid areas with the highest grade agricultural land where we can. Sometimes that's not always possible. And where not, we're exploring ways to reduce the impact of the railway on agricultural practices and soil resources. And that doesn't just relate to land, it also relates to the to ensuring that we minimise the disturbance on farm holdings. And thinking about impacts on the community, is really important to us, whether that relates to visual impacts, amenity impacts, and we're doing this by very much focusing that effort through the design around eliminating, minimising, or where we need to, mitigating disruption to local people, communities and the environment. So what I wanted to do now is take you through some of the questions that have been put to us. So these are summarised questions that have come out of the consultation. And what I will do first is just pose the question, then I'll provide a response. So the first question relates to, what about environmental damage? Your preferred line is going through Clapham Woods. Well, the project is absolutely aware of Clapham Woods. It's an area of potential ancient woodland and it is an area of ecological value. And as such, direct impacts on that woodland will be avoided. I mean, I just want to be, you know, to rest assured that the route does not go directly through Clapham Woods. The earthworks associated with the woodland are likely to be close to the woodland edge, and detailed design will need to consider the localised narrowing of these earthworks, where indeed it is feasible, so as to maximise the offset of the route and the woodland. And indeed, what we will seek to do is identify other opportunities where we can create additional woodland habitat in the vicinity, including to buffer and further bolster the extent of the retained woodland. The next question is, the proposed route entry from Bedford to Clapham Green contravenes Bedford Borough's own Greenbelt environmental policy. Well, the scheme does not actually impact any Greenbelt in Bedford, but where we are proposing development in the Greenbelt, East West Rail will have a responsibility to demonstrate to the Secretary of State why building the railway counts as a very special circumstance, such is the case for the scheme as a nationally significant infrastructure project. At the next stage of design, we will consider how we can reduce the impact of the project on Greenbelt, where there is an impact, in both the design of the railway and by proposing mitigation measures such as landscaping. And East West Rail Company have been engaging with Bedford Borough Council through the extent of this project, and we will continue to do so. The next question is regarding the proposed Great Wall of Clapham. The viaduct rail line is 15 metres above carriageway. Have noise contours been provided so we can understand the noise impacts on local residents? Noise levels will be calculated for every sensitive receptor, that's residential, transport, users of community facilities, etc. And indeed it will include the communities near the line, the rail line, and those potential impacts will be reported in future publications, both in terms of the preliminary environmental information report and the environmental statement, which will be submitted with the DCO. As part of both of those reports, noise contours will be provided so residents can understand baseline noise levels, what the noise levels are in the existing circumstance, and indeed changes in noise levels arising from the operation of the scheme. Final question is, if you are avoiding environmental impacts, why are you risking harm to the rare bat population at the Eversdens? What mitigations are in place to preserve them? Well, the Wimpole and Eversden Woods is approximately 2 kilometres from the closest part of the alignment and will not be directly impacted by the proposed scheme. East West Rail are very aware, as I mentioned earlier, through surveys of the Barbastell bat populations that are present within the woodlands, and indeed we've been in discussion with Natural England on this topic for well over a year. We have undertaken specialist surveys of the woodlands in late 2020 and we're continuing to do so in 2021, which will allow us to update and get further data on flight routes of barbastells, which are come to and from the woodlands, and where the route does come into contact with any flight route. Several mitigations will be open to us in order to facilitate the safe passage of these bats across the route. For example, the project is likely to be on viaduct in a number of locations where water courses followed by the bats are crossed, with bat able to continue onward unimpeded in these locations. Furthermore, additional mitigation and compensation measures will be investigated, including the creation of additional woodland and grassland habitat in the areas between those woodlands and the route. And this will facilitate the bolstering of available habitat close to the roost sites. Importantly, Natural England will need to be satisfied that these proposals allow for the maintenance of the favourable conservation status of the Barbastell bats present before the project can proceed without challenge. Thank you for listening. I'd like to hand over to Maria.
Thanks, Nick. And hello again, everybody. I just wanted to take the opportunity, because I can see that we've got a lot of questions coming in on the chat bar, just to frame the purpose of this webinar, really, which is for us to take the key themes and specific questions that have been asked by people in previous webinars and via our consultation responses, and to try and answer directly some of the questions that we've received so far. But there is an opportunity over the next few weeks. We've added in an additional 10 Q&A live chats, and those are there's at least 3 a week over the next few weeks until the non-statutory consultation is concluded. So if you would really like to have a one-to-one chat with one of our experts, so that we can make sure that your specific questions get answered, that for us is the best way to talk to one of our experts and to have your thoughts and views heard, so that you can respond to the consultation before the 9th of June. So all the dates and the information are available on our website, and please do join the team so you can interact with us directly on those kind of Q&A sessions. So I'll move on now to freight. And freight for us is an area where we've had, in particular, a lot of questions, and it's something that we wanted to expand on further for you. And so in terms of what our specific plans are for freight, well, it's important to note that freight across the country does provide an opportunity and a way to remove traffic from the road and transport goods in a more sustainable way. So it does directly reduce CO2 emissions and congestion on local roads, and it does add a great deal of value to the economy. But it's important to us that we balance the benefits of freight and the modal shift that comes from moving goods by rail as opposed to road, with the views and the needs of the local communities that we're going to serve on this railway. So Caris, if I could have the next slide, please. We've got a number of considerations in relation to freight. So we at the moment, and my team, are developing our timetable for the full service between Oxford and Cambridge, and our key consideration is passenger paths and passenger services. So we need to make sure that we provide, as I said previously, a reliable clock face departure, and then that will help us to understand what, if any, freight can be accommodated in between those passenger services between Oxford and Cambridge. So we do have an objective of building a railway that is capable to operate freight, but we are absolutely and predominantly a passenger railway. We're in the process at the moment of developing our strategy towards freight, and as we move towards the statutory consultation, the picture will be much clearer, and we'll be able to share a lot more information with you, specifically on the future of freight on this railway. So moving on, we've had a number of questions, and I'll follow Nick's lead and read them out for anybody that's listening. So the first question is around, will the line that passes through Clapham be used for overnight freight? So I want to dispel the myth, certainly, that freight will operate overnight on this railway. We have laid out our proposed hours of operation in the customer experience and operations section of the consultation document. So on page 33 of that document, you'll find our indicative hours of operation, which include both passenger and freight trains. So we're clear that it's not our intention to run freight overnight, and it's simply not part of our plans at the moment. So, but I do want to stress that there are existing freight services on this route at the moment. So particularly in the Oxford area, also freight trains run between Bletchley and into Bedford, and also at the Cambridge end of the route. So there is freight at the moment that operates through Bedford, spread out over an 18-hour operational period of the railway throughout the day. But from an East West Rail perspective, we don't envisage there to be freight overnight on our railway. Question 2 is it mainly a passenger or a freight railway? So just to expand a little bit on this question, passenger services are at the heart of our project, and really the scope given to us by government and by the Department of Transport is to improve public services and public connectivity across the arc and between Oxford and Cambridge. So the passenger experience and our approach to customers is at the heart of our railway and the heart of our consultation. So if you've got specific views on freight and freight operation on the railway, please use the non-statutory consultation to share those views with us so that we can make sure we build those into our next stage of proposals for the railway. And finally, no community within a few miles of the Camborne to South Cambridge rail line is going to be unaffected by 24-hour freight noise. So it's important to say that at the moment, although there isn't a firm decision on electrification of the project, from a passenger railway perspective, we're exploring alternative technologies, as Nick mentioned, and there is a mandate that by 2040 there won't be diesel-only passenger trains on the railway, and that's something that we're committed to. We are going to have an interim fleet of trains from a passenger perspective, but our long-term plans for our fleet are to utilise emerging technologies, whether that is through overhead lines and electric trains, or a hybrid solution with battery and electric, because we are conscious that overhead stanchions provide some visual impact. So we're exploring a number of options from a passenger train perspective, and then particularly in relation to freight, you know, the accurate information from us is that there is no 24-hour operation of freight planned for this route. And in terms of how we mitigate noise, which Nick touched on briefly, the way that the track will be constructed and operated, there's many ways that we can mitigate noise, and it's something that we have as a key consideration moving forward as we develop the scheme. So thank you very much. I will hand over. Ian, I think you're back.
Okay. I thought I was but that's fine. I think we can do some Q&A next, and Paul's got some answers to some of the questions on the next slide. So if we just move on, please. So yeah, next slide. Thank you. So Paul, there's half a dozen questions, 5 questions here that that we've been asked by a number of people, and we've tried to summarise these questions. So if we run through these, the first one is about how the viaduct proposed to run across the A6, the Paula Radcliffe Way and Clapham Road, is going to be designed sensitively to match its historic surroundings. Do you want to pick that one up?
Yes, sure. Thanks. So I'm Paul Sparrow, Programme Manager on Connection Stage 3. This is a really good question, and it's the kind of points that we really like to see come through in this consultation, because we are very aware that there is a big difference between having significant bits of infrastructure, so things like bridges and viaducts, that are really quite ugly and detract from the location that they're sat in, versus structures that are actually aesthetically pleasing in their own right. And I think you only have to watch the number of TV programs on at the moment about railway lines in the UK and around the world, and how many of those pictures you see are always taken of, or shots are taken of, trains going over impressive bridges and viaducts around the world. They can be something that really enhance an environment rather than take away from it. So this is something that we are aware of. At this stage of the design, we just know that we need a viaduct in this location, and we know what the height of that is. We haven't got any aesthetic designs done at this point in time. As we go into the next design stage, that's where we will start to look at what these structures should be looking like. So please do submit some responses to this consultation with some views on this, because I think it's things like this that can make a real difference to the scheme.
Okay.
So I'll jump on to the next question, shall I? So we
carry on through the question. Well, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So the next question is, what additional measures will be taken to reduce the risk of flooding to the village of Clapham? Your technical report is predicted on the risk of major floods as rare incidents. 2 major flooding incidents have occurred in the last 30 years. So again, this is something following on from what Nick was talking about in terms of flood zones. We are very aware of the flood risk north of to the north of Bedford from the River Great Ouse. And in fact, you don't have to think that far back to Christmas when Bedford was hitting the headlines for the flooding in the area from the River Great Ouse. This is something that we are working closely with the Environment Agency on. And actually, the reason why we have a viaduct in that area is so that we don't worsen the flood situation that exists today. Now, I note that the question is about what can we do to reduce the risk of flooding. This is where we need to conduct further work with the Environment Agency, and it's something that they have recently started to look at in terms of how infrastructure schemes could help with flood risk reduction rather than just not making the situation worse. And we are currently doing a little piece of work with them to look at another area of the River Great Ouse to see how an infrastructure could help to minimise flooding to built up areas. So there's further work to be done to this. I totally take the point that there have been significant major flooding incidents in very recent times, and if anything with climate change, that's just going to increase. We've seen impacts of flooding on the railway, existing rail network recently, particularly up in Scotland, where unfortunately it resulted in a few deaths. So flooding is very, very important, and it's very, very important to us, not just for the railway perspective, but the surrounding communities that we are next to. So the next question, if you're aligning with the road developments, then why don't you follow the A428 to Black Cat? I'm assuming that this question actually means following the A421 from south of Bedford, then up to Black Cat, from which it then turns to the A428. That alignment is basically route option B, which was discounted back in 2019 and announced in 2020 at the route option selection, beginning of 2020. The key to aligning with road developments is aligning with the road development where it makes sense to do so for the railway and for the destinations that we're trying to get to, rather than just following roads for the sake of following roads. And so in the options that you would have seen to date there, our merging preference follows the new A428 up to Camborne North, but that's because we are connecting to Camborne North, and it's that alignment that makes sense for the railway to go and follow that road. However, when you're looking in the Bedford area, one of the options south of Bedford is to maintain a station in and around the Kempston, Hardwick, Stuartby area. So there would still be a connection for East West Rail to the south. And then you have the additional connectivity and interchange at Bedford Station and the opportunities that affords Bedford for regeneration. And that's what this railway is about. It's that opportunity to regenerate. So that is the reason why Route E was selected, and that is the reason that we're not following the A421 from the south of Bedford to Black Cat. There are additional environmental reasons, plus it's flatter ground, so greater fill import requirements as opposed to cut fill balance. So there are additional factors, but those are the key ones as to why we're not following the 41 and using route option B. The next question, please say something about how the A603 is traversed and the impact on the elevation of the railway behind the Eversdens. So the current design is that the railway would go over the top of the A603, and as such we'll be providing what's known as an underbridge to allow the A603 to remain in position and travel underneath the railway. The elevation immediately behind the Eversdens is running from 3, 4, 5 meters up to around 8 meters when it then starts to join the viaduct just before the 603. This is something that we will be looking at the next stage of design. I think it's important to say that the current design is reasonable worst case. And as such, what we have been doing is putting the railway over a number of assets and features. Now that we have some more detail and we're getting some more detailed information through, we can start to look at specific sites to see whether it's better to bring the railway down and stick the road over the top. It should be also highlighted that as per the policy of the Office of Rail and Road, we cannot put in any new level crossings except under exceptional circumstances. So we can't design the railway as it used to be designed in the past, where the road and the railway could be at the same level. So we have to be able to do what's termed as a grade separation, with one of the infrastructure systems being higher than the other or a different elevation to the other. And that is why we are currently going over the top of the 603, but we will look to see whether or not there's an opportunity to bring the railway down and put the 603 over the top. And that would then have an impact of lowering the alignment around the Eversdens even below the 5 odd meters that it is currently. And then finally, the section between the A428 crossing at the Eversdens has a lot of embankments. Your policy is to make the railway low where possible. CBRR have proposed putting in a trough as widely used around the world. Why is this not possible? Wouldn't there be a lot of avoidable noise for villages near the Eversdens? Well, I think a few key points here. As Nick had mentioned previously, carbon net zero is something that is very important to us. And the single biggest contributor to carbon in the construction industry is concrete. So the more that we can minimize the use of concrete, the better. Now, I appreciate that we've got some viaducts around the place to be able to get over bits of infrastructure and flood zones. At the next stage, we will look to see how we can minimize those as much as possible, but without impacting the resilience of the railway and the resilience of the communities that surround it. But putting a railway in a trough is a hugely expensive way of doing things, huge carbon impact, and is not something that is really done normally for a railway outside of a city environment. Troughs tend to only be used in circumstances where it absolutely has to be used. And in terms of avoidable noise, a trough doesn't necessarily give you a noise advantage, because the noise will reverberate around the walls and the floor of that trough, and will change how the noise is dissipated around the area. So the automatic assumption that will create a void noise is not necessarily true. And finally, it should be highlighted that new railway lines plus new rolling stock, in this day and age with continuously welded rail, new bogie systems on trains, are not noisy in comparison to the old clack stock that used to operate on the on previous lines with jointed rail systems. So we are looking at the next stage to see if we can lower the alignments in as many places as possible. We will also be looking at things like environmental planting, for visual impact, and it will offer an element of noise impact reduction as well. But we're just not at that stage of design yet, but these are all things that we will be doing. And I think I'm then handing over to Ian.
You are, Paul. Yeah, thanks for that. So this next section is about a series of questions to do with a potential northern approach into Cambridge, and this is a subject we've come back to because lots of people have asked why we're not considering a northern route into Cambridge rather than the southern route that we've been promoting. So on the next slide, what we've summarised is the background to this. So back in 2019, we had a non-statutory consultation, and if you recall, we consulted on 5 route options. The route options are the sort of the fuzzy areas like the one you can see in the picture there. So not a fixed alignment, but an area through which we could fit potential alignments. All 5 of those approached Cambridge from the south, and the reason for that, the reason we concluded that was the right alignment at the time, was a combination of engineering reasons, some operational reasons, some economic reasons, and environmental reasons. So all of those, major factors in our assessment process. And in that consultation back in 2019, we also asked people whether they felt it had been right to prioritise the routes which approached Cambridge from the south. And we had a mixed response to that. Some talked about preferring a route to the north, some the south. The overall conclusion was that approaching Cambridge from the south did still remain the preference, and so that was the route that was included in our preferred route option back in January 2020. But of course, we had done quite a lot of work prior to that to look at both the southern and a northern route, and to make a comparison in terms of journey time and engineering and operational characteristics between the two. And feedback from the communities and stakeholders during that 2019 consultation was part of what led us to conclude, and we've talked about this earlier on around Bedford. It's part of that was what concluded that route option E was the preferred option. If we move on to the next slide, then please. So how do the two routes compare? So in fact, we were keen to just reopen the issue on the northern route to look at what that might involve now that we are proposing stations to the north of Camborne, because of course that does take the route a bit further north than it was previously. And that route, you can see the orange line on this map, took us past Bar Hill across the A14, close to Oakington and Northstowe, and then swinging around to join the West Anglia line north of Cambridge, and then following that route into the city. In terms of journey time and distance, well, I mean, actually in distance terms, there's not very much in it. The northern route, you can see almost from just looking at this map, the northern route and the southern route are pretty similar in length. Actually, I think the northern route is slightly longer, but only by a kilometre or so not very much. It is quicker going via the south, and that's largely because the West Anglia line has a higher running speed south of Cambridge than north, and of course it does depend on whether a station was provided at Northstowe or not. Certainly in terms of infrastructure on the floodplains, a lot of the area around Northstowe and that side of Cambridge is very low lying, and so quite a large percentage of that route would need to be built either on viaduct or an embankment. And the other issue that we looked at was the number of properties that would need to be acquired to build the route. And what we've been trying to do with all of our route options is avoid the direct impact on people's homes, and so minimise the number of properties that we would need to take in order to build the railway. And as the route swings onto the West Anglian line, we would need to widen that line to provide capacity for the new railway. so build some extra tracks, and that would impact on, and it sounds like quite a big range, but between 39 and 84 homes on that northern approach into Cambridge. The reason we can't be more specific at this stage is because, you know, we would need to do some more design to narrow that number down. But certainly what we can see from our preliminary design is that we are looking at that type of that sort of number of properties that are going to be affected. And then finally, in terms of benefits associated with the Cambridge South Station. So, as you probably know, Network Rail have plans to build a Cambridge South Station, which would be used to service the biomedical park south of Cambridge, and then unlock some access to some additional housing as well. So you know, comparing the two, the southern approach satisfies more of the requirements of the brief that we have to create this new railway between Oxford and Cambridge than a northern route does. If we go on to the next slide, then please. We've summarised this, and again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into this in very much detail, because again, you can read about this in our consultation documents. So, but what you can see is here a comparison between the southern approach, which is our preference, and a northern approach. Then in the next slide, what we've summarised are a few of your questions. So the first is about why we're committed to a southern route, and the question reads, you know, why are you so committed to a southern route which runs on a 10-metre high embankment, twice as high as the Great Wall of China, for 17 kilometres, and takes freight through the historic centre of Cambridge? Well, we've seen quite a lot of speculation as to the scale of this embankment, first of all, and you know, Paul talked about this earlier, but we're not proposing a 17-kilometre long 10-metre high embankment. Absolutely, that's not what we're proposing. And in fact, we don't have any sections of embankment that are longer than about 1,800 metres in length, and we don't have viaducts that extend more than about 330 metres. Yes, the overall height could reach 10 metres in places, but not over a kilometre long stretch. And you know, we will be looking in future stages of design to mitigate those higher sections of embankment. And actually, where there are high sections of embankment, we'll look at how we can mitigate the environmental impact of them through changing the slope angles and planting and other environmental measures. But to go to the root of that question, really, and I mentioned it when we were on the last but one slide, our commitment to a southern route is because we think it best satisfies the objectives of the programme. It joins up communities and workplaces, and it has a minimum impact on physically on people's homes and on the environment. So to move on to the next question, why are we saying...
Ian, just before you do, just to deal with the taking freight through the historic centre of Cambridge, I just thought it'd be worth mentioning that Cambridge today already has a significant amount of freight that goes through it, both continuing down the West Anglian main line and going onto the Shepworth branch, so the King's Cross line. And the station is specifically set up to be able to deal with freight with the through track that is provided between platforms 1, 4 and 7. So it's not the case that East West Rail will be bringing a new capacity to Cambridge in terms of freight. That already exists and already operates today. Yeah,
and I think it's also, Paul, it's also true to. So thanks for that, but it's also true to say that, you know, what we are designing here, what we're proposing, is essentially a passenger railway. So yes, it will include some freight traffic, but you know, first and foremost, it's to create the best possible passenger service between the cities of Oxford and Cambridge, and so that's been our focus, recognising that undoubtedly the line will carry some freight. Moving on to the next question then, why are we saying that the northern approach requires too many embankments and viaducts when the southern approach requires that too? Well, again, you know, it's a question we've been asked by a lot of people, and when you compare the two routes into Cambridge, going to the north, the route, because it crosses a lot more floodplain, does require more either low embankment or bridges, you know, viaducts, than if we go in by the southern approach. It's absolutely true to say that both approaches need viaducts, but actually the difference between the northern approach and the southern approach is something like a factor of 3. So we'd need about 3 times more viaduct if we go north than we would if we go south. And then the final question here is, why have we not put more effort into exploring more than one northern approach? We're discounting it without even properly considering it. Well, actually, we have looked at lots of options for the northern approach. The one that you saw a couple of slides back is the route that we consider the best option if we were to enter Cambridge from the north. So we've gone through an iterative approach in this, and we've come up with the conclusion that this probably is the best fit, certainly the shortest northern route, and you know, we've tried to develop it on an equal basis to a southern route to look at how it best fits the requirements of the scheme and is the optimum engineering solution. So I think that's all we have on Cambridge northern approach. I'm now going to hand over to Jorn, who's going to talk a little bit about impact on landowners and areas around compensating landowners where they're affected by the scheme. So Jorn, over to you, please.
Thanks, Ian. So yes, my name's Jörn Pace. I'm the land and property manager for East West Rail, and I just wanted to give some pertinent information for landowners. So during this consultation period, we've been meeting with landowners whose land could be potentially required for our proposals. And within these meetings, we've been able to explain the proposals further, the project timeframes, the statutory provisions which would be available to landowners, and the next steps. Moving on to our need to sell scheme and what we're consulting on, we thank those who have provided feedback to date. And as a reminder for those who aren't aware, this is a scheme which would provide support to those who have a pressing need to sell, but who are unable to, due to our proposals, accept at a substantially reduced rate. And to answer some of the questions that have been coming in on this, the purchase would be for the unaffected market value of the property, and there isn't a set distance in which the scheme would apply. And if introduced, it would be at the point of the preferred route alignment announcement point, which is expected later this year. So we really value your feedback on this. Please do get in touch. Let us know if you think it's the right mitigation, and if not, what support you would expect to see. There's further information on our website. There's a section focused on land and property, a number of leaflets which discuss the need to sell scheme further, but then also the compulsory purchase process, compensation and blight. And we have a team who can talk you through these. So get in touch through our contact channels or attend one of our live chat events where you can talk directly with one of our experts. I'll now pass back to Claire, who's going to discuss the consultation further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan. So how you can get involved. There are lots of different ways you can get involved in the consultation, and many of you already have, because we've had quite a few responses to the consultation, which is great. You'll see our virtual consultation rooms are open. They're on our website, so please go and look at them if you haven't already. There's lots of information in there that you can find, documents and maps available via the central table. Importantly, we've still got 10 live chat events open to the public. They're 2 hours each, between 2 and 3 a week, until the end of the consultation. And it's during these sessions we've got our team of experts lined up to actually talk with you, to have a dialogue with you through the computer. Unfortunately, we can't do it face-to-face at the moment because of the situation we all find ourselves in, but please do go to our website and look for live chat events. You'll see how to join them on the website, and this really is your opportunity to ask us all the questions you have. Many people have joined the events, and also you'll notice that the live chat function, even if the event isn't taking place, you can drop your question into the function and we will get back to you. So for those people who aren't online or are uncomfortable to come to online events, we have a phone number. And again, I'd encourage you, if you know of anybody in this situation who doesn't want to come along to webinars, please would you take a note of our telephone number and pass it on to your neighbours and other members of your community. That would be brilliant, thank you. So we have a feedback form which we encourage you to fill out. You'll find copies in the virtual consultation room, and please share your views with us. And the closing date for the consultation is the 9th of June. Next slide, please. So how you can respond to the consultation. So I've just mentioned we have feedback forms, and they can be submitted online by emailing us at consultation@eastwestrail.co.uk, or you can send your form to us by post to our free post address. If you need a paper copy of the form, please speak with us on the telephone number given there, or drop us an email at contact@eastwestrail and we'll send you a paper copy of the form. Next slide, please. So what's next? Next slide, please. So please stay in touch. It's really, really important that we hear from you. We want to answer all your questions so you can have a really informed decision about how you want to respond to the consultation. We look forward to hearing from you. We thank you very much for coming to this afternoon's event, and we hope to see you at live chat events, and we look forward to hearing from you. And again, thank you very, very much for being with us, and we wish you a good afternoon. Thank you very much. Bye.